What's up guys, and welcome back to another video. This is not covering Let's Go, as I'm sure you gathered from the title and whatnot, but this is covering the Pokemon Gold and Silver demos that were sort of leaked. So these were actually in circulation in 1997, but it wasn't properly publicised obviously because this was about 2 years before the full release of the game, so it was a very early version and there was a lot of tuning done later on. But it was leaked on 4chan about a week ago, I'd say, and people are now putting it up to a ROM so people can play it and whatnot there. So I thought I'd do a video covering it because there are a lot of changes in terms of Pokemon. So obviously there's changes everywhere like maps and items and stuff, but I'm looking mainly at the Pokemon here because the Johto Dex is very different to what it is. So there are different Pokemon designs, different Pokemon names, some Pokemon are missing, there are extra Pokemon that we never saw in the end, so it's very interesting to look through. And I think it'd be pretty fun. So do let me know what you think of these guys as we go through them. So we'll start off, of course, right at the start of the Johto Dex as it was in this demo, and we'll compare it to Pokemon as and when we find them. So first up we have the grass starter lines, and these are Leaf, Blossomole and Blossomite. So they had different names, completely different names, not Chikorita, Bayleaf and Meganium, but different names entirely. And of course you can see Bayleaf is different as well. Chikorita and Meganium are pretty much the same, their sprites are almost identical, of course they're flipped, but that's the idea. But Bayleaf completely different, you can see it's more based on a flower itself. Flower really, that's it, there's not much more to it, which sort of does link in nicely with the Meganium design anyway, because the body grows beneath it and the flower becomes around the neck. But of course Bayleaf does fit a little bit better, keeping the same body style the whole way through. But it's pretty cool nonetheless. Then looking at the fire starters, we have an even bigger change here because they are completely different. Rather than Cyndaquil, Quilava and Typhlosion, we have Flambear, Volbear and Dynabear. Nice, all pure fire types still, nothing too much changed there, but that's what they were. So you can see there are of course some similarities. There's the fire on the back, or at least the flaming fur, that sort of thing, but in the end the design was different. Rather than being bears, it ended up being the echidna and similar designs there. These could have gone on in the future to work with Pignite and stuff like that, with Generation 5's fire starters being bears, because you have Emboar. Boar Bear is fairly similar, but again, it's very similar to the Typhlosion line anyway, so it was simply the designs were refined. Then the water starters, again, it's a pretty big change. We have Cruise, Aqua and Aquaria. Very nice. So again, pretty damn different to Totodile, Crocodile and Alligator, because they are based on what look to be seals, maybe influencing Popplio down the line, because seals are very similar. You can see the body shape is very similar to Popplio, Brion, and then finally, I can't remember the name, but you guys get the idea. They're all pure water still, so there was no type change, but there was a big design change, obviously. Then past the starters is where things gets a little bit more mixed up. Similarly though, first we have Hoot Hoot and Noctowl. But except in this case, Noctowl was actually called Hoo Hoo. Very nice. They were both pure flying types, it would seem. But of course, this might have been, there are types that are possibly false. There are things that might just be placeholders, for example. So the pure flying type might not have been final, but might just have been the case. You can see Hoot Hoot is pretty similar. It's got a slightly different design around its eyes though, rather than the outline connecting to its little offshoots. It's actually just got 3 separate dots around its head. But apart from that, it's fairly similar. Its tail is a bit larger as well. But of course, Noctowl's previous early design is quite different. I mean, there is a similar body shape. It's only got 1 foot still, rather than the 2 Noctowl has. And of course, it's just a big oval, as opposed to having 2 tiers of the body. And its wings do look quite weird. But you can see there's definitely some similarity there. As I mentioned, the decks can get a bit mixed up here, so there's no Sentra or Furret. We go straight onto the Mareep line, so you can see Baspark, Flaffy and Ampharos. So Mareep was the only one that had a different name, but you can see the designs are pretty similar. There's not too much to talk about here in terms of changes. They're pure electric types, nothing extra was different there, just a different name change for Mareep basically. Moving on further, we have this guy, and this is a baby Vulpix. This is something we're going to come and see a lot over the course of the video. They liked baby Pokemon. So this guy is called Trifox. It's actually a water type, but it obviously should be a fire type if it was intended to be a Vulpix baby, because you can see it has 3 tails, there's fire on its head, and you can definitely see the progression going up to, what, 6 tails on Vulpix and then 9 on Ninetales. As I said, it's a water type, which is a bit weird, but you can imagine, as I said, placeholders and some things are wrong. It's a baby Vulpix, evolves into Vulpix at level 13, so you can definitely see what they were going for here, and there's more to come right now. Here we have Tangela and Galanla, which, as you might be able to guess, are Tangela pre-evolution and evolutions. So baby Tangela evolves at level 22, and then Tangela evolves further into level 44 into Galanla. They're all pure grass types, there's nothing too fancy there, but you can obviously see the similarities to Tangela, and of course, especially with Galangla, who knows, is obviously an early Tangrowth and may have then prompted some of the design choices for Tangrowth in Generation 4. Next up we have Rayleap, which is a water flying type Pokemon and is most likely an early Mantine, because you can definitely see the similarities there with the sort of the winged water flying type there, but there's really not too much extra to talk about with that. Then we have Babul and Numpuff, which of course you can see as Qwilfish and a Qwilfish evolution. Both pure water types, so the poison wasn't even considered at this point, but you can see Qwilfish and then its evolution. Qwilfish evolved at level 18, which is pretty early, so you can see rather than being a single Pokemon on its own, it was designed to have a stronger evolution and work on from that. Then we have even more babies. We have Pichu, Cleffa and Igglybuff, which were electric, normal and normal, as you might be able to expect. So they all evolved at level 12 into their respective evolutions, and you can see there's definitely some design changes there. Pichu is particularly changed, it's a ball as opposed to a body. Cleffa has this weird sort of antenna on top of its head as opposed to the curly hair, and then Igglybuff doesn't have the little tuft on the hair as the rest of its line has similarly, so again just some line changes there. Then we move on to Lancefish, and this is obviously Quagsire. There was no Wooper in the demo at all, Quagsire was just on its own, pure water type as well, so there was no ground type considered at this point either, so you can see it's very similar, but there were definitely some design changes and giving it an evolution or pre-evolution as well as sort of the development went on. Then we have Natsu and Xatu, both flying psychic types, flying psychic as opposed to psychic flying, so again maybe this is a change or just something that didn't work there, but pretty similar. The designs are fairly the same, there's not too much to talk about there really, but the interesting thing is that Natsu evolved into Xatu with a Heart Stone. Now, Heart Stone doesn't exist, we don't know anything about Heart Stone, but there was obviously a Heart Stone planned in this demo or planned for the full game's release to do more evolution similar to Firestone, Leafstone and the Water Stone and the Moonstone, I suppose. So that's quite interesting there, and we'll see it crop up a couple more times still. Then we have a baby Goldeen, and this guy is called Golpy. Who would have guessed? So this guy evolved into Goldeen starting level 16, pure water type, but you can definitely see the similarities there. When I first saw this I thought it actually was Goldeen, but it's just a smaller Goldeen with a shorter horn and then just generally smaller, and you can see the progression going on along the line there. Moving further on there we have Maro, who didn't have an evolution at this point, pure water type, but it's pretty much the same as it ended up being. Its tail did become more spiky and erratic as opposed to just curly, but you can see obviously it also got Azumarill as an evolution eventually. Then we have some Pokemon that just didn't exist. We have Sunmolar 1, Anchorage and Grotesque. Sunmolar 1, the 1 is possibly just a temporary placeholder name, but it evolved into Anchorage at level 19, and then Anchorage evolved into Grotesque at level 38. Sunmolar is pure water and the other two are water steel types, so while we don't have any similar Pokemon to this in Generation 2, they may have formed some level of inspiration for Carvanha and Sharpedo, as well as possibly Huntail and Gorbis in Generation 3. You can see, Sharpedo obviously links into Anchorage pretty well, Carvanha you have some possible linkage to Sunmolar, and finally Grotesque you have some similarities to Huntail and Gorbis. So definitely some possible future influence there, and Water Steel was an interesting typing, which we didn't actually see in Generation 3 at all, so that was held off for even longer. I can't remember any Water Steel types off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are some. Then moving further we have Crobat, but it wasn't called Crobat, it was called Xing. Who knows? It's because it's an X, so it's sort of like Xing. It was a poison flying type and it evolved from Crobat level 44. So it's clear here that there were no friendship levels or friendship evolution methods planned in these games at this point, because, you know, there's no friendship level. All the baby Pokemon evolve their level, and also Golbat to Crobat evolves at level as well. Next up we have another baby, and this is baby Paras, called Para. Wow, that's a, you know, big jump. It evolves at level 12 into Paras, and obviously eventually into Parasect, and this is possibly one of the reasons why they were removed eventually, because level 12 is really early, so unless the Para was coming on the first or second route, you wouldn't really see it at all. So, you know, it would have been a waste of a Pokemon, hence why it was probably removed. Then next up we have early Spinarak and Ariados. Here we have Spinit and Turhead. Yeah, interesting. But you can see definitely some similarities, especially for Spinarak. Ariados definitely had some redesigns, but both bug poison here, and yeah, not too much of a change there. Also worth mentioning that Para was a pure bug type, didn't have the grass type at that point, so it was obviously planned to be an interesting evolution if it wasn't fully carried through. Then we have Skarmory, which you can see is pretty much exactly the same. However, back then it was called Armorhawk, makes sense. It was a flying steel type. Again, maybe it was flipped, flying steel, steel flying. Who knows though? But you can definitely see the similarities there. It's exactly the same, so the similarities are it. Next though we have this, and this guy is Anemon, and it was an Ditto evolution. It evolved with Metal Coat, just I guess as an item usage here, and it's a pure normal type as you might expect. So it was interesting that they planned a Ditto evolution but never used it. Obviously it was, you know, thought about and considered, but eventually decided that Ditto worked better on its own, because what would it do? Like give it higher defenses maybe, so it could survive that first turn and transform, or maybe give it some other secondary effect, who knows. But that was Anemon. Then we have another baby Pokemon, and this is a baby Doduo called Chix. It was a normal flying type and evolved at level 16, so again it would have been pretty early, so unless, you know, the first 2 or 3 routes in Johto were filled with baby Pokemon, you were going to miss most of these and they were just going to get forgotten about, hence why they are probably removed. Then we have an early Sunflora called Sunny. There was no Sunkern, it was just Sunny, and it was a grass psychic type rather than a pure grass type. Who knows why, you know, the psychic was removed, and who knows why there was no Sunkern, but eventually there was, and you can definitely see the similarities between them. Mainly the fact that it looks like this early Sunflora just buried into the ground as opposed to had feet, but it might just be it had roots that moved instead. Then we move on next to some more Pokemon that did finally make it through, and that is Donphan and Phanpy, the other way around obviously. Phanpy was originally called Trumpet though, which makes sense, it was a trumpet, that makes sense. But Donphan had the same name, both pure ground types as you might have expected, and you know, apart from that they're pretty damn similar. So obviously the designs were changed, especially for Phanpy. He was given some extra sort of designing, and his ears were changed a fair bit as well. Moving on next though, we have what used to be Girafarig, and you have Twins and Girafarig. So this is quite interesting. They're both dark normal types, and Twins used to evolve into Girafarig starting at level 29. Of course you can see that the huge design change with Girafarig, rather than being, you know, a giraffe with like an extra tail, it was 2 giraffes, and this makes sense with its evolution there, or pre-evolution. Twins, because there were 2 of them, one normal, one dark, and they evolved that way, and it makes sense. So they weren't normal psychic, they were dark and normal, which is quite interesting, and it would have been nice to see this eventually because it does look pretty cool, especially the double Girafarig there. I'm not sure about the Twins design though, because it looks like 2 ghosts that were just flying around, but to each his own. Next up we have an early Smeargle called Paintone. It's a pure normal type, and it's pretty much exactly the same in terms of design, just some smoothing out there, but not too much to talk about. Next up though, we have a baby Meowth. This guy is called Meowsy, and obviously you can see the clear similarity between it and Meowth. It evolved at level 14, so once again, you would have hardly seen it in the game. And it's a pure normal type, so yeah, that's pretty much it. Moving on further, we have another line that went unused. This is Rinring and Bellbuoyant, pure dark types, female only as well. These could have eventually formed a basis for Purloin and Leopard in Generation 5, because they're dark type cats, so there definitely could have been some basis or some, you know, inspiration used there. But it's quite interesting that we're female only, because we didn't actually see that female only lines until Generation 5, I think. So it's quite a long time, and it could have been interesting to see this early on, but it is what it is. Next up though we have Politoed, or a different Politoed because it looks quite different. It's a pure water type still, and evolved from Poliwhirl using that Heartstone. So rather than doing the trade with the King's Rock, it was a Heartstone evolution, which is quite interesting to see the Heartstone again. But you can definitely see the design was changed quite a bit. It was given a sort of, rather than a big tall body, it was given a double head body, that sort of thing. Then similarly we have Slowking, and also another guy. This guy actually appears further down in the Pokédex, but it's clearly a link here. But we have Slowking here. It was Water Psychic, not too much different there, but it evolved from Slowbro, not Slowpoke, with a King's Rock. So rather than it being Slowpoke splits off to Slowbro and Slowking, it was Slowpoke, Slowbro, Slowking, with a full 3-stage line. Then, as I mentioned, there's another Pokemon here called Turban. It's a pure water type, and it seems to be Slowking's shell. So, as opposed to having it just, we theorise it's 2 separate Pokemon, but it looks like it's literally supposed to be a separate Pokemon that was there, and maybe just kept around, who knows. It could have formed an early basis for Shedinja though, so maybe when you evolved your Slowbro into a Slowking, it fell off and you ended up with this extra Pokemon, similar to how when you evolve Nincada to Ninjask, you get a Shedinja. Possible, who knows though. But it's quite interesting to see that there was something planned with that. Unknown was also in the game, but obviously I'm not choosing to compare it because it was pretty similar to its final aspect. They were letters, so that's that. But then, I guess the one thing to talk about for Unknown is they were Gnaw type originally, not Psychic type, so there was definitely some level of consideration there. Next up we have Ladybug and Tripstar, which of course ended up with being Ladybug and Ladian, both bug flying types, so pretty similar there. But you can definitely see some level of redesign for Ladian. It used to be a big bug, and now it ended up being like a fast bug, so it was quite a redesign there. Next up though, we have a baby Ponyta. So again, another one. This guy was called MiniCorn, and it's basically just a small Ponyta. So you can definitely see why this guy was removed, because he's almost exactly the same as Ponyta. It was actually a normal type though, so maybe it meant to be a fire type because it does has some flames, but I could see it definitely being a normal type pony and just getting some fire stuff when it evolved. It evolved at level 20, which is a bit higher than most babies we've seen, but still pretty early. Next up there, we have our evolutions, Espeon and Umbreon. The names were intact, however the big difference here is that while Espeon was a Psychic type, Umbreon was a Poison type, which is very interesting actually. And this actually makes sense, it explains a lot. There are Pokédex entries I believe that say Umbreon excretes some poisonous material, which we were like, well, why did it do that? Obviously it used to be a poison type, so they never really changed that extra stuff there. The evolution methods are also another thing to talk about. Eevee evolves into Espeon using a Heartstone, and into Umbreon using a Poison Stone. So again, Poison Stone is completely new, and you can see there was no time-based evolution talked about here, so it's possible at this point in the demo that day-night cycles weren't actually introduced, so they hadn't thought about that yet, and it was a later time that they brought that in. Next up though, we have another baby, and this guy is called Grimy. Grimy. Obviously it's a Grimer pre-evolution. Pure poison type, it evolved at level 19. There's not too much to say there because it literally is just a pile of sludge with a face on it, so I can see why it didn't make the final cut. Next up though, we have Auxilary, Remoraid and Auxilary. Pure water types as they ended up being, but you can see there's a big design change for Auxilary there. It used to be a tank. Look at it, it used to be a full proper tank. It's got a helmet and it's got like armor, pretty cool. Remoraid also had a big redesign as well, because you can see it also used to be stylized just like a gun. Its body is the chamber, you can see it's like a revolver chamber with the notches on the side. It's got like a trigger beneath it, and it's basically the same shape as a gun. So you can definitely see why the Auxilary design then makes sense, because it's like a tank, gun to tank. The final designs, obviously they remove the gun stuff because that makes a lot of sense, but yeah, that's why it looks a bit weird as an evolution fish to octopus, because they used to be gun to tank, so it's pretty cool to see that. Next up though, we have the early versions of Tyrogue and Hitmontop. We have Gong and Hitmontop. So Hitmontop had the same name, but Gong is Tyrogue. So you can see it used to be like a bear type fighter as opposed to just a thin sort of body type. But it's only Tyrogue. Again, similar to the final Tyrogue, it evolved at level 15 into either of the 3 final evolutions. You can also see though that Hitmontop had some fair redesigns. It looks like it used to be that way up. You can see its eyes in the centre of its body, so it looks like it's actually the right way up here, and it's spinning on the top as opposed to spinning on its head. So there was definitely some redesign there, but you can see the general inspiration was present. Next up though, we have another baby, and this guy is Putty, and he's a baby Growlithe. Pure Fire, evolved at level 13 is Growlithe, and again you can see why he didn't really make the cut, because while he does look a bit cute, he's fairly simple, and you wouldn't have seen him before level 13, so yeah, it's very interesting to see what they cut out, and it's interesting to think what might have been different if they had put them in, because it's a lot more baby Pokemon than there ended up being. Next up though, we have the Hoppip line, which were called Leafmew, Dandamew and Kotomew, so definitely different names, and you can see there's definitely some design changes as well. None of them had any feet, they were all just balls with tails, and then yeah, I mean, it's definitely a different one. There was still grass flying though, so that makes sense, and there were definitely some design changes along the way, but you can see that the general essence is still there, and we just needed some refining. Next up though, we have another baby, and this guy is Ballerina, a baby Mr. Mime, which of course we didn't get in Generation 2, but we did get in Generation 4, so possible early inspiration for that. It was a normal type as opposed to going straight to a Psychic type, and evolved at level 15 into Mr. Mime, again no friendship stuff there. So it's quite interesting. The design was definitely changed from this point to Mr. Mime, or Mime Jr. rather, because it used to be an egg. And yeah, but you can see the hat's still there, so there was definitely some level of inspiration that was drawn in across at Generation 4. Next up though, we have some more baby Pokemon, and this of course is Smoochum, Ellicott and Magby. They all had some level of different design choices, and the names were different for some of them too. Smoochum used to be called Lip, which makes sense because it's got those big lips. Ellicott used to be called Elibabi, electric baby basically, but Magby had the same name. They were Ice, Electric and Fire similarly, noting there was no Psychic type on Smoochum, which makes sense. But you can see there's some general design choices that filtered through to the final one. Smoochum's fairly similar, except its hair was toned down a bit. Ellicott, thank God they gave it arms, because that looks weird, but it looks cute all the same. It's like an egg with just an antenna on its head. And then Magby, very similar, just a different head style, and you've pretty much got the same thing there. And it's also quite big compared to the others, but it's pretty cool. Again, they all evolved at level 15, as opposed to through friendship or anything else there. So that's definitely a thing to keep in mind. And that the early Ellicott was only male, so whether they intended the Ellicott Electabuzz line to be male only, it remains to be seen, or whether this was just a accidental or just a temporary coding thing, who knows. Then we have Bellossom, who did have the name Bellossom and was a grass poison type rather than a pure grass type, which is interesting because the idea is that when you evolve your Gloom, you go to pure grass with Bellossom if you use the Sunstone, or if you evolved it with Leafstone, you end up going to Vileplume with a grass poison type. But they were both grass poison, and I actually evolved from Gloom using a poison stone, as we saw with Umbreon. So interesting choices, and you can see why it was changed eventually, because we didn't need the two evolutions to be the same type. But in terms of design, you can see it's pretty damn similar. The flowers on the head, the flower dress, pretty similar there. Just some changes in terms of typing and such. Then we have Belmit. Now this guy looks a lot like Bellsprout, but he actually evolves from Weeping Bell using a Poison Stone and goes to become Grass Poison. So again, very similar here. You end up with two final evolutions that are both Grass Poison type, evolve with different stones, one with a Leaf Stone, one with a Poison Stone. So again, I can see where they changed it, and you can also see how the lines used to match up. You used to have Oddish, Gloom, Vileplume and Bellossom, and then you had Bellsprout, Weeping Bell, Victory Bell and Belmit. So there used to be two lines, both with 4 in them totally, but they changed obviously. Plus this design does look a bit weird because you've taken Bellsprout, added some leaves to it, and that's it really. It does look weird, but it would have been interesting to see how they managed it. Next up though, we have Miltank, which is pretty much the same as it ended up being. It's a bit fatter here, but it's a pure normal type, so there's not too much to talk about there. Then we have this guy who is just on his own, and he's called Bombseel. He was a water fire type, which we didn't see until Volcanion, and obviously it's based on a seal, and he's got a bomb instead of his ball. So it's a random Pokemon stuck in here. Whether it could end up being part of inspiration for Poplio, who knows? But yeah, it's definitely a weird one chucked in the middle here. And here we have an early Delibird who was called Gift, because he gives gifts. Get it? It was a water ice type at this point, not ice flying, and obviously there was definitely some design changes that were changed. It has a proper Santa hat at this point, which was eventually changed because I guess they wanted to limit that inspiration, but generally it's pretty much the same. Then next up after that we have another line that went unused, which is Tigret and Electa, who were both pure electric type and obviously based on some sort of cat or tiger. So one possibility is that the inspiration was eventually used for Shinx, Luxio and Luxray, who were electric lions. There was definitely a possibility that they could have brought it through there, but these guys look pretty cute. I wouldn't have minded them being in the game. That's pretty cool, you know. Especially Tigret and Electa, they look cute, even if they're like big fat cats. They still look cute. I would like to see them eventually in a game. Who knows though? Maybe we'll see something like this in the future. Then we have Madame, who was a Farfetch'd evolution. Normal flying type as you might expect, and you can see there's definitely some similarity. It seems to be holding some sort of sword, that was possibly the leak again, and eventually it might have become some of the inspiration for Swanna because of the similar, it looks like a swan, so maybe that was some level of inspiration there. And it's sad that we didn't get our Farfetch'd evolution because he needs it. Poor Farfetch'd. Then we have some more Pokemon next, which were Kerstraw and Pangshi, both pure ghost types, and apparently Kerstraw evolved into Pangshi at level 1, which is quite interesting. The designs themselves though are pretty cool. Obviously Kerstraw is based on some sort of voodoo doll, he's got like a nail going through the centre of him, and Pangshi is based on some form of panda, possibly some Chinese inspiration there. So these guys are cool, but very interesting with the evolution. Again, that might have been a placeholder at level 1 and wasn't really intended, but who knows. Next up we have an early Murkrow, which you can say has some definite similarities, but the hat is the main change there. It used to be like a full witch's hat, and it was changed to be, you know, sort of spiky and whatnot. But apart from that, it's pretty similar. Next though, we have an early Blissey, who was called Happy, which was maybe then part of the inspiration for Happiny, but who knows. Pure Normal type, and evolved from Chansey at level 45. Again, there was no happiness evolution, so you can definitely see that there's some level of inspiration. It did have 2 egg pouches rather than just the one, and obviously a heart on its head and some extra stuff like that, but I can see where they did some changes to make it look like our final little Blissey here. Then next we have our Scizor, who was originally called Scizors, so scissors I guess, but was deemed, you know, don't need the S. It was originally a bug flying type, no bug steel type there. It was early Scizor, as I said, and evolves from Cypher at level 41, so there's definite similarities on design, and I think if you look at the colour version of the sprite, it's actually green rather than red, so that sort of links into the fact that it was a Cypher evolution and it wasn't bug steel type, there was nothing there. The next interesting thing is a Pinsir evolution. This guy is called Plux. It was a pure bug type and evolved from Pinsir at level 42, and it looks pretty cool. I would like to see this in a future game. It's got obviously, you know, the Pinsir horns as well as a third horn in the centre, and obviously apart from that the body design is pretty similar, but it does look pretty cool and it would be interesting to see. It's worth mentioning there's no Heracross in this demo, so maybe Plux eventually ended up becoming part of Heracross and Pinsir and Heracross went forward as like a, you know, a duo, but who knows exactly. Then we have early Houndoom and Houndour. Houndour and Houndoom. Houndour used to be called Devil, and Houndoom had the same name. At this point they were both pure fire types, they weren't fire dark or anything, so that obviously came at a further point, even though these designs are still pretty hellish. But yeah, I mean the designs are similar to what we got eventually, just some slight changes here and there, but you can definitely see why they added the dark type to it, because the pure fire type doesn't really sell it properly. Next up though we have some other Pokemon that were never used. We have Wolfman and Warwolf, both pure ice types. So it's possible these lines ended up inspiring Swinub and Piloswine because they were Gen 2 and they're not present in this dex at all. Or they could have eventually been part of Snover and Abomasnow because you can see some different similarities in the fur and, you know, definitely the way they're built. Obviously the ice typing works in there. But definitely guys that we didn't get to see and were quite interesting because they look like they're wearing werewolf pelts over their bodies as opposed to the bodies being the pelts themselves, which is interesting. Next up there we have Porygon 2, or what used to be Porygon 2, pure normal type, evolved from Porygon with upgrade, not a trade, just evolved with it, and apparently references some mascot of a sort of a food chain at that point, so you can definitely see why they changed that, to sort of, you know, remove any inspiration from elsewhere, and also make it look a bit more like the normal Porygon, because That doesn't look anything like Porygon itself. Moving on though, we have a Lickitung evolution, which obviously didn't come along until Generation 4 otherwise, and this guy's called Lick. Yeah, I know. Pure normal type, evolved at level 32, so you can definitely see how it inspired Licky eventually. It's also got like a turban on its head, which was probably changed, or a hat at least, something like that. But you can definitely see the inspiration how it drew along in the future. Then we have Steelix, who was pretty much exactly the same, so I don't know how Steelix was like perfect first time, but yeah, Steel ground type, it evolved to level 38. Again, the trading wasn't really implemented, I guess, at this point, trading holy items, because that was new to this generation as well, so definitely came along at a future point. Then we have Kingdra, who again has a very different design. It looks more like a dragon as opposed to the eventual Kingdra, so there was definitely some design choice and changes there. Dragon water type, and it evolves from Seadra with a dragon scale, so pretty much what we got. Then we have the legendary dogs. We have Raikou, Entei and Suicune, all very early versions as you can see, because neither of them really look like their final counterparts. The types were the same though, electric, fire, water. You can see some level of inspiration coming into each of them, obviously the build and stuff like that, but there were definitely some big changes before the end. Now this is when the dex gets a bit mixed mashy, because there are some Pokemon in random places. Again, it was a work in progress, so it's possibly that they just added them in at the end where they got them. But here we have Sneasel, who was a pure ice type, oh no, it was a pure dark type rather at this point, sorry, no ice anywhere to be found. And you can see, I guess, some level of inspiration, but it was definitely changed a big amount before the end, because it looks like a cute Pokemon here, whereas the end Sneasel looks quite different. Then we move on to Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh here was a pure flying type, there was no fire to be seen, and it's also worth mentioning there's no Lugia either. So it's possible that Ho-Oh was meant to be very similar to Mewtwo, as in it just appeared and it was in either game regardless, and it wasn't really part of the story, whereas obviously eventually Ho-Oh and Lugia are a part of the story. And eventually when they changed to that, they might have thought, well, let's give one fire and one water. Maybe that's the thought process there, why it's pure flying now and hasn't had a fire type yet. It's one possibility, but it's interesting to see there was no Lugia at this point. Maybe it's because it was just a Pokemon Gold demo and they didn't bother including Lugia, but who knows exactly, it's possible, who knows. Next up though, we have some more random Pokemon. We have Togepi, who was in here, it was a pure normal type, it didn't have an evolution at this point. It might have been because it was just added, as I said, maybe they added them at the end of the dex just because they're there. But you can see the design is pretty much the same. Eventually they did add Togetic though as an evolution, hence why Togepi eventually became a bit smaller, because it's quite big in that sprite, and maybe adding an evolution made it, you wanted it to have some level of progression. Then we have Snubbull, again no evolution here. The design is pretty much the same though, and interestingly enough it was actually a female only Pokemon and was also a psychic type. Obviously it was a normal type when it first came in and it's now changed to a fairy, so you can see the thought process they were going for at this point. I guess when they added Gramble they realised that psychic type didn't really work and changed that there. Then next up we have this guy who is called Tail, who was an early Apom, as you might be able to tell, because he's got the same sort of tail with a hand. At this point it's still normal, but there was some big design changes at this point. And then finally, possibly one of the most interesting Pokemon in the demo, we have Leafeon, which, as you might be able to tell, is an early Leafeon and actually evolved from Eevee using a Leaf Stone. So even then they were thinking about adding more evolutions like this, and you can see the design was obviously refined a bit and added in Generation 4. So it's really quite interesting that this was actually still, here or being thought about at this point in time. It's quite interesting indeed, especially with Grass Stone as opposed to being, anything else. So that brings us to the end of the dex, apart from a few garbage entries that didn't really have any data. What Pokemon didn't appear? So these are Pokemon from the Johto Pokédex that didn't appear in this dex at all. Sentret, Ferret, Dunsparce, Pineco, Fortress, Yanma, Sudowoodo, Wynaut, Heracross, Stantler, Shuckle, Corsola, I've forgotten his name, Chinchou, Lantern, Gligar, Teddiursa, Ursaring, Slugma, Magcargo, Mischievous, Larvitar, Pupitar, Tyranitar, and finally Lugia. As well as this is also Celebi, but I just haven't included it on here because it's Celebi. So it's quite interesting that these guys weren't there 2 years before the release. Every other Pokemon has some level of possible inspiration or some level of matching going on. I've left out the starters obviously because there's some level of matching there. So it's quite interesting, especially as I mentioned Lugia already, but also the Larvitar line wasn't added at all. I guess they decided they needed a line to rival the Dragonite line, so maybe they added that in there. But there's also a couple of other Pokemon, yeah, the individual Pokemon like, not Wynot? Did I call it Wynot? It's not Wynot, it's Wobbuffets. Those sort of Pokemon that were not there, but they're added eventually. It's quite interesting. But that's really it. That's all the Pokemon to go through. There's quite a lot. The video went on for far too long. Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing this dex though. Do let me know down in the comment section which was your favourite like Pokemon that didn't make it or design that didn't make it, and are there any you'd like to see in future games. Let me know down below in the comment section, and of course I hope you enjoyed the video, so I'll be seeing you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye my friends.